That's the Ama Hualapai. And Kingman became the seat of the county. And so this is one of the reasons why the name Hualapai became projected across all the bands. This is the place that non-natives had the most interaction with these people. And then way up here are parts of the Havasupai. And so when non-natives came into the area very, very quickly, especially during and after the Civil War, the Havasupai band responded by moving up north and trying to avoid this flood of people. And then in around 1880, the federal government created a separate reservation for them. So from the perspective of Native people, and good history considers multiple perspectives, this is an invasion. In general American history and American history textbooks, this is westward expansion. This is, quote, settling the West. We hear these stories about the Wild West and the frontier. And without getting into a lot of that discussion, those myths serve a particular kind of purpose to tell us stories about who we are as a nation and as a people. And this gets a little bit delicate. But from the perspective of Native peoples, this is very much an arrival of lots of strangers, some of whom respect them and some of whom do not respect them. And I say some of them do because there were some decent relationships. It wasn't always racial violence and tension. But this interaction that the Hualapais have comes very fast and very quick. This is very, very different from the Pima and the Papago in southern Arizona, very different from the Navajo and the Hopi, who've had interactions with the Spanish for centuries. Hualapais had very little to zero interaction with non-natives. They had access through trade to guns, blankets, horses, weapons, and things like that as a secondary process of regional trade. But they really didn't see non-natives, white folks, and even white folks isn't the right word because you've got recent immigrants from Europe. And so Anglo isn't the word for recent German arrival, okay? So it gets a little tricky. So this is really sort of a flood of people, and of course there's tension. We know about the Wild West. The Wild West involved guns and shooting, and a vigilante group that killed one of the main leaders, Wawayuma, and killed his sons. And so Hualapai bands are not going to sit idly by and take this, so they retaliated. And then non-natives retaliated. We got a cycle of violence that was very brutal and very bloody. The Arizona Miner, one of the territorial newspapers, demanded the, quote, extermination of all hostiles in the region. And the, quote, Hualapai Wars went on, I'm sorry, I've got the dates all mixed up, 1865 to 1869. So this is literally right after the Civil War. As the Civil War was ending, one of the ways the federal government paid Civil War veterans was through land. And calling native land, quote, public land, that gave the federal government possession of that land to sell off without really consulting native people. So it's a recipe for conflict. And so there was quite a bit of conflict until this guy came in, Colonel William Redwood Price, who made a name for himself fighting various groups throughout Arizona and New Mexico. And these are direct quotes. These are direct quotes that I got from the United States National Archives on the old onion skin paper, written in the very elaborate sort of quill pen ink. So he says, we're going to drive and harass the degenerate Hualapais until they are thoroughly whipped. And then in his journals in November, we surrounded and attacked a rancheria of Hualapai Indians, killing 19, capturing 6 squaws and children. And just parenthetically, the term squaw is really an insult. It's a profound and deep, deep, deep insult. And we can talk about that later if we want to talk about present politics and culture. But the term squaw was used in a particular derogatory way. And that's pretty good evidence for that. In December, we surprised a rancheria of Hualapais, killing 3 Indians and capturing 4 children, destroying a large quantity of seed and Indian property. Now remember, being after the Civil War, the techniques of a scorched earth campaign had become fairly popular in U.S. military strategy. And this is one of the things that many of the colonels, generals, captains used. was not just to capture Native people, but to burn and destroy the very land upon which they gained their subsistence. The title of the talk comes from the Long Walk. How many of you have heard of the Navajo Long Walk? Raise your hand. Okay. At the time period, the Hualapais had heard about the Long Walk as well, for the Navajo, actually. And after these wars came to an end, the federal government wanted to put a number of Indian tribes on the Colorado River Indian Reservation. They were proposing upwards near 10,000. And I'll show a slide in a second. And so the Long Walk came from the U.S. military trying to, quote, round up Hualapais and march them south to the Colorado River Indian Reservation. This is a several-week walk that began in late April and continued through, I think, early May. This is the beginning of the very hot Sonoran Desert, because you're going down off the Colorado Plateau and hitting the Sonoran Desert, more or less. A lot of people died, and then they were interned at the Colorado River Indian Reservation for precisely 1 year. And after 1 year, they escaped. And so these quotes come from some Hualapais who actually lived through it. So 1944, and if we go back to 1875, people in their 70s. Okay? And then some of the quotes that I've got in the book come from children who were born a few years after this. And so the Long Walk is a very important turning point in Hualapai history. This, in fact, actually marks what they consider their, quote, history. Okay? Their history was this time period of modern Hualapai history was born out of this Long Walk and internment. And the Long Walk and internment is a very painful part of their history. But in recent years, they've started a Long Walk run, or a run from La Paz. So every year they do this in April. And I've participated in this one time. And so they run from La Paz, families, children, elderly, all the way up back to the Hualapai Reservation to commemorate the event, but also to commemorate their survival. Because it's painful, but a lot of folks don't want to dwell on the pain. They want to kind of get on with the future and get on with the good things in life. So these quotes here, all Hualapai Indians, we skipped off, going down into Grand Canyon to get out of the way. So these quotes say, we ran away, we saw the soldiers, we saw the guns, we saw the dust, we saw the horses. These people were coming to get us, and they tried to run away. After internment, people tried to return to their old homelands, which were increasingly populated by miners and especially ranchers. And so right down here is the Colorado River Indian Reservation, and then the site called La Paz. It's not exceptionally far from Hualapai homelands, but again, this is very, very rough terrain. It's extremely hot. You have people who are malnourished, elderly, etc., etc. After internment, one of the main things that a lot of Hualapai leaders, the band leaders, sought was a reservation. Reservations are complicated places, and they're part of a very complicated history. A history that's ambiguous, sometimes contradictory, and it's sometimes hard to wrap your head around this. But a lot of Hualapai men served as scouts for the United States military during their campaigns against the Apache. And during those campaigns against the Apache, they saw a number of reservations down south. And in particular, they saw a reservation that was at least 2 million, upwards near 4 million acres in southeastern Arizona that was extinguished. This was for a lot of the Apache. So they saw these reservations, and they thought maybe if we got one of these, this would be some sort of protected place for us, considering the people coming into the area, and also considering the Santa Fe Railway that was lumbering westward. And they knew about this in part from seeing it, but also from Navajo and Hopi. In particular, Hopi, with whom they had a very good relationship. Long, long trade relationship, and also a good bit of marriage. And so they saw this railroad coming across, ranchers, and they thought, We want some land to protect our families, to protect our future. While they were working on this, while they were striving for this, they were working in wage labor. So there's tons and tons of stories. Hualapai is working in Prescott, Kingman, and Seligman, doing whatever wage labor was available, ranging from wood cutting, cattle ranching, cowboys, Hualapai cowboys. So Indians are cowboys now. There's an interesting little play on words. Also, there were a number, about 6 Hualapai men that worked for the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and then worked for the Wild West shows. And a number of Hualapais went to Europe on those shows. So people are adapting. They're doing whatever they can do to survive. And then in 1883, Chester Arthur created the reservation. It sat within Hualapai homelands, but only for about 4 bands. It did not cover the land for the other bands. So when they created the reservation and then called it the Hualapai Reservation, which was an English derivation of the name of one band, there were a number of bands that were reluctant to go to the reservation because it seemed like it was named after, it seemed like it was intended for only one band. So there's some people that said, we don't want to go there. This was compounded by the fact that the Santa Fe Railway hit the reservation about 2 months after it was established, and then put the rails right into Peach Springs. And so when you go to Peach Springs today, you know about the railroad, which is a cause of, I don't know, how long has it been since 1883? 125 years of dispute about land easements, about all kinds of different things. So when they came in, they claimed about 1/3 of the land through an 1866 federal railroad grant. So the railroads got all this free land from the federal government. So the railroads, corporations got free stuff from the federal government to help settle the American West. So this is an estimate of the Hualapai, the Aboriginal or the traditional land base, and then the Hualapai Reservation. So you see the shaded stuff, and then it kind of comes down to here. Comes down to here. And when I was doing work in the National Archives and then also in the Arizona State Archives and Library, a lot of the communications were coming out of Prescott, as it was the territorial capital for quite some time. One of the things that is kind of one of the concepts that I talk about is space or landscape. And many Native people and lots of cultures have particular relationships with land and with space. If you ever leave a place, you miss the feel of that place. And when you come back, it has a particular feel. It has memories, you see things that have memories, families, stories, etc., etc. And so space and land for Hualapais and many Native people was very important. So one of the first things that non-natives did when they came into the area was they remapped the landscape. So when the United States military was going west, they had topographical engineers. They had cartographers with them. And there's a practical reason for this, that you need to know where water is when you're bringing all these troops. Okay? But you also need to know the landscape for strategies in relationship with the Native people. And so the mapping process was very, very significant, sort of erasing many Hualapai landmarks and putting new landmarks with non-native names onto them. And this was part of this process of, quote, colonization. In particular, this reservation, as I said, was kind of an ambiguous place. But on the one hand, people were forced on there, okay, uprooted, but it was also a place that was more or less protected. It was 997,000 acres of land, a good chunk of land that the federal government was supposed to protect and trust. So it's a combination of things. It's a place where people might be able to survive, but it's also a place where the Indian Bureau, religious groups, Friends of the Indians, and others could try to assimilate them. So it's a mixed bag. So when I was doing this research, I spent a lot of time in the Mahogany Museum of History and Culture. And I have to say that they were a really wonderful group of people. I showed up there, I think in 1998 or so, fall of 1997. kind of a scraggly, fairly arrogant grad student. Thought I knew everything. And they were a lot of help. I spent a lot of time there looking in their newspaper reels. I'd like to think that I've matured a little bit since then.